Olá, muito boa tarde a todas e a todos que acompanham o nosso congresso. Nós damos início agora à segunda apresentação do dia de hoje. Inicialmente, eu gostaria de agradecer aos nossos patrocinadores, aos nossos apoiadores, a PwC, ao Grupo Gen Atlas, KPMG, Concefaz e Traders Club. Hereafter, I will talk in English, since we have an English presentation. The topic of this presentation is trending actuarial research. The main presenter will be the Professor Emiliano Valdez, which holds a PhD in business from University of Wisconsin in medicine, and he's a professor at the Department of the Mathematics at the University of Connecticut. He's a fellow of the Society of Actuaries. His primary research interest is actuarial science that covers topics in couple of models, applications of statistics to insurance problems, managing assets, risk measures, and capital requirements related to enterprise risk management. The discussion of this presentation will be Professor João Vinícius de Carvalho, França, which holds a PhD in statistics from the University of São Paulo, and he's a professor at the Department of Accounting and Actuarial Science at FEA-USP. Currently, he is a coordinator of the undergraduate course in actuarial science. He's experienced in both life and new life actuarial mathematics with emphasis on applied probability and statistics. He's also a fellow of the Brazilian Institute of Actuaries. Professor Emiliano, the floor is yours. Thank you so much for your acceptance and your presentation.
Let me just speak a few words just before Professor Emiliano speech. First of all, of course, I would like to thank you all for joining us today in this first international session of our USP International Conference in Accounting. This is a very special moment for our research group. If you don't mind, I want to share my screen just to point out some aspects following my speech. Can you see my screen?
Mm-hmm.
Is that everything okay? All right, then. I am Professor João Vinícius de França Carvalho. Currently, I'm Associate Dean for Actuarial Science undergrad program at FEA-USP, and it's an honor to talk to you in this afternoon, in our very first special session of this Congress. As I told you, this is time to celebrate, because after 14 years since from interruption of our undergrad actuarial science program, I want to share you that it's been 15 years since we have recreated our undergrad course in 2006. It's been such a short time, but it's not that long, but it's important to make it clear for everyone. And now we are more than proud to announce that we are opening a formal stream of research in actuarial science in our traditional master and PhD programs in accounting at the University of São Paulo for the next year. I hope this encourages students to join us in this endeavor. I'm really proud, and I'm the one who got the honor to host our special guest and also to moderate this session. Entitled Trends in Actuarial Research. Our speaker, Professor Emiliano Valdez, as Professor Eduardo said before, is a fellow of the Society of Actuaries and holds a PhD in business, concentration in actuarial science, risk management and insurance, with minor in statistics from the University of Wisconsin in medicine. Professor Emil is a tenured full professor at the University of Connecticut and former director of the Actuarial Science program at Michigan State University. His academic experience includes several years of teaching and research in 3 different continents: North America, Oceania, and Asia. His primary research interest is actuarial science that covers topics in copula models and dependencies, application of statistics to insurance problems, managing post-retirement assets and risk measure, and capital requirements related to enterprise risk management. In recognition for the quality of his research and significant contributions to the actuarial literature, he has been recognized in several ways, having won Best Papers awards at conferences, awarded the Halmstad Prize twice, the Edward Liu Award, and the Hachtmeister Prize. Just in terms of organization, we'll have around 45 minutes, maybe 50 minutes of presentation by Emil, followed by a Q&A session. Please feel free to make your comments and questions through the chat box below. Emil, thank you very, very much for having accepted our invitation, and the virtual stage is all yours. Thank you very much.
Oh, thank you. Thank you very much, Professor João and Professor Eduardo, for the very nice introduction. But more importantly, I want to thank all of you for being here today. It is a pleasure to be a part of this conference. It's a pity that it's virtual, but I was hoping that we could do it in person, because I've been to Brazil many, many times. Actually, the year before the pandemic happened, I was in Rio de Janeiro, attending a workshop also in financial math and actuarial science. And many years ago, I was also in Sao Paulo at the statistics department. I remember I gave a talk there. At that time, the actuarial science was actually fairly, I think, evolving in some sense. So I'm glad to hear of these changes going on, the ongoing development that Professor João mentioned. So I'm happy to hear that. I hope to have the opportunity again someday to visit. So is the slides being shared now? Okay. So I'll start with the front page, yeah. So this is the title of my talk about trends in actuarial research. Actually, so I'll motivate it with what I think are driving forces of the future and probably even the current research direction in this area. I'm sure many of these driving forces are probably the same that are driving the changes in research in accounting and many other disciplines. So I'm happy to talk about this. So let me start with, the second page, please. I want to start with this quotation that I found from a recent study by Deloitte, because in some sense it reflects the ever-changing role expected of the actuary. So it says no longer is the actuary solely considered a calculation guru. Historically, they've been thought to be just doing mathematics and calculation, but today they wear many hats. So they serve as risk manager, business advisor, industry leader, and their responsibilities are also increasing because of market pressures. And then they have to manage also regulatory changes, and then also the demand from rating agencies. Next page, please. So here I want to focus on these 5 different driving forces that I consider to be somewhat moving the direction of actuarial research. They're actually quite obvious to many of us, because they're also reasons why our lives, everyday lives, are changing. But it's for the same reason that actuarial profession is evolving, same reason as actuarial research is also changing. So the first one is, we're all aware of modernization of technology. So this is ongoing. So it's moving at a very fast pace. So usually we think about modernization of technology. Are computers increasingly faster, high powered than before, and even more portable? So this is changing the way we analyze data, access data, and the ability to improve data analytics. And I'll dig into details in each one of these more later on. The second one that I consider is environment. This is actually a global environmental change. It's affecting our everyday lives and threatening us globally. Uh, the largest inevitable threat is that of what we call the climate change. Obviously, you're probably feeling the brunt of this, causing disruption in our everyday lives, but also changing our ecosystems, biodiversity, as well as the quality of air that we breathe, which might affect, in some sense, our health. So another thing is the pandemic. It's hard to be precise of the primary origin of the existing pandemic, but we can say that the environment in some ways have to do with the outbreak, I think. The virus transferred from humans to animals. That's not been uncommon. That's been observed previously in previous endemics. But so essentially, I attribute this to environment because in some sense, I think we are somewhat careless with our treatment with the environment that we live in. The third one is consumer demands. So consumers are becoming more sophisticated, more educated. So they're demanding more, better products, better solutions to what risk they face. They're becoming more tech savvy. The use of digital is becoming more commonplace. And so in the sense, the direction here is that they want more personalized and customized pricing. I'll talk about what the insurance companies are doing in response to some of these. And then the last two ones are quite obvious. One, the emerging risk. I'll focus on some of these. For example, climate risk I mentioned, pandemic risk, cybersecurity actually is becoming a threat. And then we hear about the development going on with cryptocurrencies. There's financial risk involved there. And then other things that are not quite obvious are shifts in demographic changes that are changing the trends in the way we live, that affect our health, our access to medical care, employment, and even as far as migration. And then I'll talk about industry trends. The one particular thing that's affecting the insurance industry is what we call the insurtech. This is quite, in some sense, really not new because it's somewhat a derivative from financial industry. It started with fintech and now being followed for insurance companies. So these are startup companies that are using data and technology to help insurance industry to be more efficient. Next one, please. So let me start with modernization of technology. So when we think about modernization of computing technology, the most frequent observation we have is the escalation in computers becoming faster, more calculation effective, and even more powerful. So for actuaries, the immediate effect on this is on data analytics. So fast computers allow actuaries to improve predictions much better. So that's good news. We know the actuaries have historically been making use of data and models to make predictions. So these advances in technology make it possible to do many more things than we used to do when it comes to data analysis. So I list a few things here. For example, perform better preliminary investigation. We can do a lot better visualization techniques now, for example. We can handle class imbalances. This is also quite important. Observations that are missing in our data set. It used to be that the common practice was delete the observation whenever we have something missing. But nowadays, we can impute values to missing observations. So we can employ better algorithmic techniques, and the end result is that we improve predictive analytics. So here, for example, we have a special issue in risk on data mining in actuarial science. There's quite a few papers now that have been submitted there, but it's actually ending at the end of the year. So if any one of you are interested, you can have, there's a link to these slides. I don't know if the slides will be made available, but feel free to make this available, Professor João, okay? There's a link there. The colored blue ones are actually linked. So the paper that I kind of like a lot from this issue is the machine learning in P&C. It's focused on general insurance, but it's a review of pricing and so looking back at traditional work of the actuary, but now employing more modern machine learning tools. Next one, please. So we all know that accessibility to this data set is very, very constrained, primarily due to consumer privacy protection concern. So I'm talking about access to real data set for researchers. So obviously, it's very difficult to get them. So for actuarial research, there's a need, obviously, for access to this data set in order to be able to conduct better risk assessments with better accuracy and more efficiently. So modeling involves construction, calibration, testing big and diverse data with meaningful information. And usually, biggest driver for this is the acquisition of real data set. However, there is actually a trend, not only in our discipline, but in also other disciplines. For example, I stay at the bottom here in medicine, surprisingly, it's for the same reason that patient data usually is very difficult to get for researchers. So there are now research with new machine learning algorithms. You can actually create new data sets that mimic, that doesn't, it's not exactly the original data set, but it mimics or imitates the behavior of the original data set. In fact, we've done that in some of our work. So I list here some recent research on this, including the work by Gabrieli and Mudrich. So they based their simulated data, but they based it on real data set. So it's not exactly the real data set, but it behaves like the original data set. So which is good news. And I think this is what other disciplines are also doing, the same thing in medicine. I only mention here medicine because this is the paper that I found in a journal in medicine, published by Concalves here and other folks, which deals with what we call synthetic patient data. Next one, please. So data mining and technologies obviously offer many advantages and opportunities, but there is an increasing trend threat of inadvertent outcomes of what we call discrimination. Sometimes this is called algorithmic bias, okay? So the idea is that you use data machine learning and then it tends to bias the result. Bias in the sense that it discriminates against a certain group, although sometimes not intended, just because you use an algorithm. So this is a growing concern in machine learning per se, but for insurance, this is even a bigger concern, because when we use data, and we don't want our machine learning algorithms to discriminate, because obviously regulations will be watching, among other things. Now, this concern about algorithmic bias actually is not quite new. I remember having a report. You can actually Google this. I don't have a link here, but in the White House, they did a report in 2014 when big data algorithms were coming out. They warned us of the possible unintended discrimination outcome of these big data technologies. A good review is this one here by Pavarotti. This is actually a non-actuarial paper, but it provides you a systematic review about some of the threats resulting from big data and discrimination, and also offers you some of the possible solutions, okay? So there are actually, this is also one area of research that I'm very much interested in. So I'm only beginning into looking at it. So what I'm doing is I'm looking at what other disciplines are doing to identify biases, okay? So you don't wanna have an algorithm that discriminates against, for example, male and female. A very, very good example actually has to do with credit scoring. This is a big issue. So in credit scoring, the algorithm might tend to bias against people who are low income, people who are of different race, for example, and that kind of stuff. That might be unintended, but that's an example of what might be something that you don't want to result from your algorithm. So the issue of discrimination is becoming very, it's in the newspaper nowadays. It's not only in insurance, it's not only in finance, it's not only machine learning data, but also in other areas, for example, in hiring, in policing, in voting as well. So it's the idea, the concept is quite important in many aspects of our lives. Because of too granular data, so when I say granular data, so the data becomes very detailed, okay? So before, actuaries only have group data. So you can only observe maybe the amount of claims for a group of insured, for example, a group of male that have high income, for example, and so forth. But nowadays you can get granular, so meaning individually observed data. So here, when you have these, the increase in threat of heightened discrimination becomes a reality. So the increased use of proxy variable for risk classification that may be discriminatory is the one result that actuaries do not want. All right, next, please. So I'm moving on to the next driving force, which is clearly the environment. So the most talked about is the existential threat of global warming. Scientists have all agree. In fact, they've always warned us, been many years that they've been saying that temperatures are rising faster. But it's only now that we're feeling the brunt of it, the effect. So indeed, just this summer, I don't know about in your place, but we had record-breaking temperatures. We had wildfires in the West. We had floods. These are happening actually in areas also in Europe. I don't know if you heard about Belgium and recently about floods. And also in China, actually, floods have become. And recently, about 2 or 3 weeks ago, there was actually flooding in the subway in New York City. I don't know if there were any. I think there were certainly many injuries, but I don't know if there were any deaths. But that happened, and that certainly is attributable to global warming. I like this issue in the Actuary. So the Society of Actuaries have a magazine that comes out every month. So they had a roundtable discussion of the threat of global warming. So the title of the issue is actually the time to prepare is now. And what that issue talks about is the different effect of climate crisis or climate change to the insurance industry. Clearly, the cost is the biggest concern. So the cost of damages of severe weather conditions. So for example, hurricane, floods, wildfires on our body, for example, sometimes the temperatures reaching over 120 degrees Fahrenheit. I don't know how much we can bear the heat. And of course, some area of research that has been focused in actuarial science is the agricultural insurance, actually. This actually is, so the idea here is that when you have climate threatening conditions, you might not harvest as much. So, or the quality of the harvest is not there. So there is an insurance for this, which is called agriculture insurance. So this is a concern for actuaries, obviously. And there's also an International Actuarial Association, which is a body, actually an organization of many organizations of actuaries or actuarial profession around the world. So they organize a lot of things. And one of the things that they did last year was put out a report on the importance of climate risk to actuaries, actually. They focus on a lot of things. One, for example, who are impacted. And obviously, because insurance is a big concern for actuaries, so what are the potential threats to insurance and customers and insurance companies? So there's obviously a growth in research related to this. One direction that I've seen quite a lot is agricultural research. The Society of Actuaries is getting into this now. So sometimes they put out what they call a call for paper or a call for research. So they're trying to encourage more research on using non-traditional techniques to evaluate this threat. At the same time, measure what the cost of having global warming. Next, please. So the next topic is, or driving force that I call, is the market and consumer trends. The landscape of the insurance industry is continuing to change, obviously at a very rapid pace. There are increasing trends in the industry that offer us opportunities, but also present some challenges. Now, some of these are what you see on the slides here, which I call market and consumer trends. I've mentioned that consumers are becoming more educated. They are more demanding for better products. So they have, with this type of education, they become more aware of what insurance can offer them. So they continue to demand for better service, better products to help them mitigate their everyday risk or everyday risk that they face. Pandemic, for example, business interruption, climate crisis, I've mentioned. And they're also seeking for ways to reduce their premiums. So, for example, now there is a personalized driver insurance, in some sense, I call, which is the industry call it usage-based insurance. So this is using the telematics technology to somewhat track driving behavior. Although during the recent pandemic, there is an observed trend in life expectancy in the US and many parts of the world as well. I look at Brazil actually, for just to give you an example. Brazil also had a decline in life expectancy by actually quite substantial, 1.3 years in 2020. Of course, that's only 1 year observable, but still. And then so far, we're only in the first 6 months, there's already an observed drop in life expectancy even further by 1.8. Obviously, some of these, I think, contributed by the effect of the pandemic. So we hope that this is only temporary. But the decline in life expectancy, if this continues, obviously it will have some changes to the type of services, insurance services and products that we would have to offer. The other thing it's not really, I don't know if it's a threat, but the lower fertility is also one that have been observed for some time now, actually. I have a undergraduate research student, actually, hoping to do an honors thesis on the impact of the drop in fertility rate. This is observed in the US, and I think we've observed this before. I think if you recall during the war in the 1940s, so my student would like to see what effect it had on the economy, on the livelihood of people. But nowadays, the interests are different. So, for example, obviously on technology, on what kind of products are important, and that kind of stuff. And then, because I mentioned this also, our consumers becoming more sophisticated, so they ask for more what we call personalized consumer experience. So an example of this is telematics, which I'll focus sometime in the next few slides, I think. Let's see what the next slide. Okay, so some of the responses to these market changes, I have a list here. So during the pandemic, the biggest concern was about business interruption. So most coverages, I'm not sure if many of you are aware of what business interruption insurance cover. So essentially, if you have a business, a typical example would be, suppose you own a restaurant, right? And then obviously during the pandemic, you have to lock down. You have to stop your business. And so you lost profit. It's very much unlike having a hurricane, for example, where it damaged your restaurant. In some sense, the same because you have to stop business, you lose income. In that respect, insurance will cover that. But with pandemic, it's something very rare. So not sure what is happening there in the market. I've seen quite a bit of survey whether insurance will cover it, but the government is trying to interfere whether it's the insurance company or the government should subsidize for these things. But in the US, I think it's quite clear that there's a lot of subsidy going on. Recently, they came up with a very generous package for many people and industries that are affected by the industry. And that includes restaurants, the restaurant industry. So another thing is telematics. So telematics in some sense is customized pricing. So you install a device or you install an app, and then insurance companies will store information about your driving behavior. And so the idea is that your premium that you pay would reflect your true driving behavior. And I think it in some sense, there are good things about usage-based insurance. So you get better price, better profitability, more predictive profitability for insurance. That's good. And there are other good things about telematics also. Usually, because now that you are being monitored, sometimes people become aware that they're being monitored, so they drive less. So in some sense, there's an indirect of helping out the climate. So another new concept that has appeared now is what we call peer-to-peer insurance. So this is a product, so where it's no longer an insurance company providing the insurance, but a group of people, a group of insureds that try to pool their resources. So the idea is that they self-organize and that they self-administer their own insurance. So in the old days, I don't know if you're familiar with, there are this type of organizations called fraternal organizations. That's the idea. But fraternal organizations are like group. They are together for a reason. It might be for a religious reason, for example. It may be for a purpose. But for this peer-to-peer, the difference is that they are getting together to be insured. So hopefully, there will be enough people in the pool to pay, whenever something's happen. There's enough money in the pool to pay any damages that might result from covered insurance. There's a description of this by the NAIC on P2P, but the one that I found very recently about a simple analytics of peer-to-peer insurance. So essentially, this is how you would analyze how the group would cover insurance and how they would each make a share of the cost of providing insurance. Next. So just to give you a background, I've talked about this a lot. I'm doing a lot of work on this actually, on telematics, because I have this data set on telematics that we acquired from a real insurance companies, and we're finding it to give us very interesting results. So we're able to do machine learning algorithms to analyze. So the first paper we had to do with what we call imbalance classes. So the idea with telematics is that you use a device installed in your car, and then a technology transmit and store the information about your driving behavior. So this has a lot of applications in the automobile industry. This telematics idea has a lot of other applications in other disciplines. A most recent one that happened during the pandemic is the health telematics. I'm sure you might have experienced this, where instead of going in person to see your doctor, you just go online and access your doctor. You speak, and then if something is terrible, then your doctor will say, you have to come see me in person. But if there's no need to see the doctor in person, you just use the web online. So that's the basic idea. There is actually a study that talks about the economic benefits of usage-based insurance. So how much premium do the consumers save? They generally save about 5 to 15%. Okay. The only thing there, the threat is that you are monitored. So in some sense, there is a privacy concern that you might have. You have to give that up because that's necessary. Otherwise, it will not work. But also, there are social benefits. I find I've mentioned this. The people seem to be driving less when they know that they have usage-based insurance, or they have a device that monitors their driving behavior. So in some sense, lesser cars, lesser emissions, reduces congestion, good for the environment. All right, next, please. This is just a list of work on the things I talk about on telematics. Now, I want to point out a study actually by Ayuso in 2016. It's somewhere in Spain there in the second, yep, right there, 2016, Spanish data. So what they found out was when you use telematics information, the use of gender becomes irrelevant in the presence of telematics information. So the type of telematics information you can derive from UBI examples are the number of times you brake, the speed, whether you overpass a red light, the weather condition, whether you're driving fast, and that kind of stuff. So a lot more information depending on what the insurance company wants to store. But I'm pointing this study because so they found out that when you use telematics information, gender becomes unimportant. We know that there's a difference between driving behavior between male and female. I think this is well known, but in Europe, apparently, I don't know how it is in Brazil. It will be interesting actually, and I'd like to hear it maybe towards the end of my talk. Gender cannot be used for pricing insurance in any parts of the European Union. So in some sense, the substitution of telematics information will also substitute the use of gender. So so in some sense, this does not preclude you from, making a deduction that telematics information actually is a better predictor than gender. Especially with gender, we talk about discrimination, right? So if you price, in the US, they still price between male and female because obviously young male drivers are the worst, okay, according to many studies. So a male still a worse driver than female. So, but like I said, if you can use telematics information, it's it's a good excuse to have no gender in your variable, in your risk classification. So next, please. I think I'm almost running out of time. So emerging risk, I've mentioned many of these. I'm sure many of you are very well aware. The pandemic risk, obviously, so the type of insurance product demand changes. There's also, in some sense, change to health insurance. There are changes to the healthcare industry and the question of government subsidies and so forth. Climate change, I've talked a lot about it. Mitigation is very important. There's a lot of government intervention here, so which is good. So the government, many countries are uniting. So there is what they call the Paris Climate something agreement. I think that it's actually a congregation of all the countries that wanted to mitigate climate change. Cyber attacks is another thing. We hear this a lot in the newspaper. This is in insurance. There are type of insurance products that can mitigate cyber risk, but it's very, very difficult to measure cyber risk. Okay, so when insurance companies offer this, they need to be well aware of the uncertainty, and they need to hold enough reserve, because suddenly it's something that doesn't happen maybe very often, but when it happens, it could hit you. All right, it affects a lot of things. There's only not damage to computer, but there's also damage to your reputation, for example, as a company. So there's a special issue now ongoing in the insurance mathematics and economics. This is one of the top journal in insurance and actuarial science. They're looking for papers on emerging trends and emerging risk and insurance technology. Next, please. Industry trends, I've mentioned some of these. Increased challenges from competition. So it's becoming more competitive now because of technology. Pricing becomes more transparent. Consumers are able to compare prices. They can go to different markets and see which one gives them the best coverage. Regulation, always ever changing. Also management and cultural changes now in the workplace. So the pandemic made us realize that we can actually work at home, even sometimes more efficiently. This becomes challenging for management, I think. So for actuaries, this might not have an effect on the direct effect on actuarial research, but the cultural change might have an impact on the way we measure risk and the way we manage certain insurance products. Now, the one big thing that is now ongoing is insured tech. Okay, insured tech are actually startup companies that are trying to use data and technology so that they can do some of the things that insurance companies cannot do very, very efficiently. That's the idea. So they are actually becoming a driving force for innovation in the insurance industry. Next page, please. Almost on the final one, sorry. So InsurTech refers to the use of technology innovations designed to transform the insurance industry to be more efficient. Here are some examples of these innovations. Consumer pricing using non-traditional products, because they can get data now. They try to get data from publicly accessible information. So before, insurance companies can only use the data that they have gathered from consumers. But now with InsurTech, they can gather non-traditional risk variables. Use of digital app to track health, automating claims processing, more personalized pricing, and so forth, okay? So these are actually transformations ongoing because of InsurTech. So in some sense, they're assisting insurance companies also with some of the required data analytics, because InsurTech actually hire computer experts, those that are very good in data analytics. And then actually that's about it. I think it's a good time to end, but I have a final remark on the last page. Next, yep. So the traditional research now of actuarial science has been moving. So very rapid pace, and I've mentioned 5 driving forces that are contributing to the direction of this research. They're clearly evolving, and also the nature of the work of the actuary in practice also evolving. So that makes it more important to conduct more improve actuarial research to help actuaries do their work much more efficiently. So there's a lot of room for innovation in research. There's a lot of room for making contribution to the actuarial literature. Of course, each factor, I mentioned 5 factors, each of them present both opportunities as well as challenges. I mentioned some of these in my talk. And I think it's a good time to end, and I'd like to entertain your questions. Thank you very much.
We do thank you for your nice presentation, Professor Emil. And just to answer your previous question about discrimination of gender in risk classifications, we are allowed, we as a country, we allow companies, insurance companies to discriminate through gender. But there are some evidence about that shows that women drives better than men. Women drive better than men. So it's quite in a common sense. It's a trend that we can say as a trend, of course.
Yeah, that's not surprising. That's actually, I think, everywhere it seems. I mentioned young male. That's the worst driver group, I think.
Around the globe. And I got surprised about the non-massive size of the databases used in telematics. How big are the data sets that you use to deal with?
I don't remember the exact number, but we started with millions of records.
Millions. Yeah, because the paper that you pointed out here was about 30.
I think we didn't take. Yeah, so the paper we did, we used the real data. So there's 2 papers we have on that now. The first one uses the real data, but they gave us only a sample. So they gave us, they separated the training and the test set, but it's based on millions of records. And then later on, they decided their concern of privacy, so we cannot use it ongoing. So we decided we want to create a synthetic data set. So we did create a synthetic data that's publicly available. You can go to my website. There's a link there if you are interested in it mimics the original data set very, very well. And we have a paper that published in Risk. We explain what we did. It uses neural network. You know, neural network is a very, very good algorithm for accurate prediction. accurate prediction. And so that's why it was a good algorithm for us to use, because we want to mimic the real data set. We want to be accurate in some sense. So we use neural network quite a bit in that imitation.
And also,
But the problem with neural network is the interpretation, I think.
of course, and also you can emulate deep learning layers through the whole databases that can show all the structure dependencies of all variables.
Yes, that was all captured in our. Yep, we did a lot of what they call tuning. You know, you do a lot of parameter tuning when you do neural network. Very complicated because you have so many parameters to estimate how many nodes you have, and then there's also the forward, non-forward, the and then what functional form to use. I think, we did a lot of tuning many of the parameters you mentioned. How deep do you go? How many nodes and that kind of stuff? Yeah.
Fantastic.
It's very complicated.
From Alvaro, that
do we have questions from the audience?
Yeah, I'll try to. We are almost out of time, but we have time enough to one question here. Professor Luis Eduardo congratulated you for the presentation that was brilliant. And he would like to know, what is your view on the role played by the actuaries in the area of social protection and the research agenda, of course, especially in social security and pension systems?
That's a very, very good point. I actually haven't intrinsically investigated this, but you are indeed right. So I mentioned about demographic shifts. So I think, I forgot to mention that. That's a very, very good point. It will definitely affect social security. I don't know how your social security is funded, but in the US, it's actually pay as you go. So the idea is that the young people working now are paying the old people retired, right? So now when you have fewer younger people, where do you get the money now to pay all your promised benefits for the old people? That's a threat. That's a very, very good point. I haven't really looked at that because I haven't been so interested in pensions. But actually, that's an interesting area indeed. So when we formulate, I think we're planning to form this into a paper. We're going to mention the social security part.
Fantastic. And another quick question that I closed the chat box, but it's okay. About the pandemic issues. Sorry, Paulo. Paulo Cavalcanti asked you that, do you think that at this moment, important and non-important aspects for research about the pandemics, how important you think that it would be in the current agenda for research?
I think it's important because we don't want to repeat this pandemic. That's so we need. So managing it has been all over the world is like chaotic. So I hope that we learn from this. I think it's very, very important. So I mean, not only in the actuarial aspect of it, but obviously there's an actuarial aspect to it because there's a cost. There's many costs involved with pandemic. So actuaries are very good in modeling and predicting. I think there are some work in that direction. I haven't seen the details yet, but it's quite important to be able to have what they call now pandemic modeling. to be able to see when the next pandemic is, okay, and how we've seen some of these. We've managed them. So Ebola, I don't know if you remember, SARS also was a version of COVID in some sense, was well managed. I don't know what happened to COVID. It just threw us all off. It became a real pandemic. Usually, the pandemic in previous ones were localized, right? They were able to contain, but this one we were not able to contain. Started in China and just spread out all very rapidly. I think part of the if you want my opinion of who is to blame, I think the leadership has to blame. They were not fast enough to act. I think that's the bottom line from my personal point of view. Of course,
we haven't learned the lesson yet. Since
I think if they, I think they didn't accept it, right? Like, oh, it's just another virus, like flu virus. Like they just.
And
anyway,
sorry for interrupting you. We are out of time, but I want to make a personal question as an associate dean of an actuarial program. I want to hear your opinion and personal point of view about the inclusion of themes in undergrad programs in the US or other part of the world about Bayesian statistics and copula models, such sophisticated techniques to model dependency structures and learning very difficult things to interrelate. How do you see the incorporation already in the undergrad programs, please, Professor?
To tell you honestly, it's not typical in a undergraduate program. But in a graduate program, it would be. Bayesian MCMC, for example, is very advanced. But they can take some statistics classes on some of these things. So the only thing is that it's not focused on actual problems. I think it's quite important. So what might be important, so we have a course generally that is sometimes called a special seminar, where if somebody wants to teach new things, advanced things, we're welcome to offer. And these are non-traditional, definitely, because the idea, the problem is the undergraduate program is already overwhelmed, right, with many courses. So they have some elective. If you have a lot of room to offer, I think it's essential. By the way, in Europe, they are more advanced. They already do copula models and Bayesian in their undergraduate for actuaries. Some of these things are offered in the statistics department and taken by actuarial folks. But I haven't heard of anything where copula, for example, per se, is offered for actuaries. But I actually introduced copula in my loss models, but of course, not as, because I introduced multivariate, and then I moved to, and then Bayesian MCMC, I do it for my predictive modeling in the graduate level.
Fantastic. Thank you very much for your very clear presentation, Professor Emil, and your kindness for
thank you so much.
accepting our invitation. And once again, everyone, thank you very much for attending this session. I want to say a few things as a propaganda, of course, I would like to take this opportunity to invite you to join our actuarial sessions later today, which we will start on 5 p.m. So stay tuned, please. Thank you very much. I wish you all great evening.
Can I join that?
Of course, of course, you're more than
Okay,
invited.
the same link. It's the same link.
No,
that you get.
I will tell you later how to join us for the next session later. But I'll keep you in touch later today.
Thank you.
But I want to say goodbye to our folks that are attending.
Yeah,
Thank you very much, people.
Yeah. Yes. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.